What happens when America's most beloved late-night host meets one of the most polarizing figures in modern celebrity culture? You won't believe what unfolds when a seemingly innocent conversation about royal life turns into an explosive confrontation that ends with security being called to the Late Show stage. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's appearance on Stephen Colbert's show became the most talked about television moment of the year. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two clash in what started as a promotional appearance, but quickly spiraled into complete chaos. The Ed Sullivan Theater was buzzing with anticipation as the audience settled in for what everyone expected to be another entertaining episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The guest list had been generating buzz all week, with Meghan Markle scheduled to appear as the headline guest to promote her latest venture. The producers had briefed Colbert extensively, knowing that any interview with the Duchess of Sussex would require careful navigation, given her history with media controversies and public feuds. As the cameras rolled and Colbert delivered his signature monologue, there was an unmistakable energy in the studio. The audience was primed for what they thought would be a standard celebrity interview, complete with witty banter and promotional talking points. Little did they know they were about to witness television history in the making. When Meghan Markle walked onto the stage, she appeared composed and confident, flashing her practiced smile as she waved to the enthusiastic crowd. Dressed in an elegant navy blazer and carrying herself with the poise expected of someone who had spent years in the public eye, she seemed ready for what should have been a straightforward promotional appearance. Colbert, ever the professional, greeted her warmly and launched into what appeared to be standard interview territory. "Welcome to the show, Meghan. It's great to have you here," Colbert began, his tone friendly, but with that signature hint of mischief his regular viewers know so well. "I have to say, you've had quite the journey over the past few years, from Hollywood to royalty to Hollywood again. That's quite the career arc." Meghan's smile seemed to tighten slightly at the comment, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for having me, Stephen. Yes, it's been quite the journey, and I'm grateful for all the experiences that have led me to where I am today." The first few minutes proceeded smoothly enough, with Colbert asking about her current projects and Meghan delivering what sounded like well-rehearsed responses. But those familiar with Colbert's interviewing style could sense he was building toward something more substantial. His questions began to probe deeper, moving away from safe promotional territory into more personal waters. "You know, I've always been fascinated by the concept of duty versus personal happiness," Colbert said, leaning back in his chair with that characteristic look that signals he's about to make a point. "You've spoken publicly about choosing your own path, even when it meant stepping away from certain responsibilities. Some people admire that courage, while others see it as an abandonment of duty. How do you reconcile those different perspectives?" The question hung in the air for a moment longer than it should have. Meghan's media training kicked in, and she began to formulate what sounded like a diplomatic response. But there was something in her expression that suggested she found the question more loaded than she had expected. "I think it's important to remember that we're all human beings first," she replied, her voice carrying a slight edge that hadn't been there moments before. "The idea that anyone should sacrifice their mental health and well-being for an institution, regardless of what that institution is frankly outdated thinking." Colbert nodded thoughtfully, but his follow-up revealed he wasn't planning to let the topic drop. "That's interesting because, traditionally, public service has always involved a degree of personal sacrifice. Presidents, military leaders, even late-night talk show hosts," he said with a self-deprecating grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We all make sacrifices for the roles we choose to take on. When you accepted your position, didn't you understand that would be part of the deal?" The studio audience, which had been laughing and applauding throughout the early part of the interview, seemed to sense a shift in tone. The laughter became more sporadic, and an uncomfortable tension began to settle over the room. Meghan shifted in her seat, her professional smile becoming more strained. "I think there's a difference between reasonable sacrifice and being asked to endure treatment that no human being should have to endure," she responded, her voice taking on a defensive quality that even the most casual viewer would notice. When you're dealing with systematic racism, deliberate character assassination, and a complete lack of institutional support, that goes far beyond normal sacrifice. Colbert's eyebrows raised slightly, and he leaned forward with the kind of intensity that his audience knows means he's caught the scent of a story. "That's a serious accusation. Are you saying that your experience was fundamentally different from what other people in similar positions have faced? Because history shows us that many have dealt with intense scrutiny and criticism while serving in public roles." The question seemed to strike a nerve. Meghan's carefully maintained composure began to crack, and for the first time since sitting down, she looked genuinely agitated. "Stephen, I don't think you understand the unique challenges that come with being a woman of color in that particular institution. The way I was treated, the stories that were planted about me, the complete lack of protection from people who were supposed to support me, that's not normal criticism. That's something else entirely." The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something far more intense than a typical late-night interview. Colbert, to his credit, didn't back down, but his tone remained professional even as the tension in the room became palpable. "I absolutely acknowledge that racism is real and that your experience was your own," he said carefully. "But when you make these kinds of allegations, don't you think it's fair for people to ask for specific examples? Because when you speak in generalities about planted stories and lack of protection, it can sound like you're asking people to just take your word for it without providing evidence." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she sat up straighter in her chair, her voice rising slightly as she responded. "Evidence? You want evidence? Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up every day to headlines calling you difficult, demanding, a diva, when you know that's not who you are? Do you know what it's like to have your own family members selling stories about you to the press?" Colbert remained calm, but his journalist instincts were clearly engaged. "I can't imagine how difficult that must be, but many celebrities deal with negative press coverage. What makes your situation different from, say, other high-profile figures who faced intense media scrutiny?" The question seemed to be the final straw. Meghan's professional facade cracked completely, and the anger she had been holding back began to spill over. "Other celebrities? Stephen, we're not talking about tabloid gossip here. We're talking about a coordinated campaign designed to destroy my reputation and drive me out of the country. And you sitting here minimizing my experience and demanding proof like I'm some kind of defendant in a court case. That's exactly the kind of treatment I'm talking about." The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed unnaturally loud. Colbert looked genuinely taken aback by the intensity of her response, but he pressed on with the kind of persistence that has made him one of television's most respected interviewers. "I'm not trying to minimize anything," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm trying to understand. When you make serious accusations about systematic racism and coordinated campaigns, people are going to have questions. That's not an attack on you personally. That's how accountability works in a democratic society. But the damage was done." Meghan's anger was now clearly visible, and she was no longer trying to hide it. The professional mask had slipped completely, revealing someone who felt cornered and defensive. The audience could sense that something was about to explode, and the tension in the room was becoming almost unbearable. As Colbert prepared his next question, completely unaware that he was about to trigger a confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks to come, Meghan sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her jaw set with determination. The stage was set for what would become one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. Neither the host nor his guest realized just how dramatically the next few minutes would unfold. What happened next would transform a tense but manageable interview into a full-blown confrontation that left viewers stunned and producers scrambling. The moment that changed everything came when Colbert, sensing he had touched on something important, decided to push just a little bit further into territory Meghan clearly considered off-limits. "I want to be clear that I'm not questioning your experience or your feelings," Colbert said, choosing his words carefully, but with the persistence of a seasoned journalist who knew he was on to something significant. "But when you talk about systematic racism within the British royal family, that's an incredibly serious accusation. You've mentioned conversations about your son's skin color, but you've also been somewhat vague about the details. Don't you think the public deserves to know more specifics about something that's serious?" The question landed like a bombshell. Meghan's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, and the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly erupted into full view. Her voice rose sharply, cutting through the studio's silence like a knife. "Vague? You think I'm being vague?" she snapped, her composure completely shattered. "Stephen, I have protected that family's privacy even when they refuse to protect mine. I have been deliberately careful about what I say, because I understand the implications, but somehow that's not good enough for you people. Nothing is ever good enough." The audience collectively held its breath. This was no longer a celebrity interview. This was a woman having a complete breakdown on live television. Colbert, clearly taken aback by the intensity of her response, tried to regain control of the situation. "Meghan, I think there might be a misunderstanding here," he said, his voice calm but concerned. "I'm not trying to attack you. I'm simply asking the kinds of questions that any journalist would ask when someone makes serious allegations. That's not personal. That's professional responsibility." But Meghan was beyond reasoning at this point. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration came pouring out in a torrent of angry words that left everyone in the studio stunned. Professional responsibility? She laughed bitterly, a sound that sent chills through the audience. "Let me tell you about professional responsibility, Stephen. Where was the professional responsibility when newspapers were printing lies about me making Kate cry? When they knew the truth was the opposite? Where was the professional responsibility when they were calling me demanding and difficult for asking for the same things everyone else gets automatically?" Colbert realized he was losing control of the interview entirely, but his journalistic instincts wouldn't let him back down completely. "I understand you're upset, and I can see this is painful for you. But surely you can understand that when someone makes the kinds of claims you've made, people are going to have questions. That's not malicious. That's human nature." Human nature? Meghan's voice was now loud enough that it echoed slightly in the studio. "You want to talk about human nature? Let me tell you what human nature really looks like. It looks like a pregnant woman being told she can't have the mental health support she desperately needs because it might look bad for the institution. It looks like being told to smile and wave while people are literally calling for your death online. That's your precious human nature." The studio audience was now completely silent, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of people enjoying a show. It was the uncomfortable silence of people witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Several audience members looked genuinely concerned, and at least one person near the front appeared to be recording with their phone. Despite the no-recording policy, Colbert made one more attempt to salvage the situation, but his next words would prove to be the final trigger that sent the entire interview spiraling into complete chaos. "Meghan, I hear what you're saying, and I believe that you experienced real pain," he said, his voice gentle but still carrying that underlying journalistic persistence. "But you have to understand that when you left the royal family, you also left behind the context that would help people understand your experience. You've chosen to speak publicly about these issues, but you've also chosen to maintain your privacy about the details. You can't have it both ways." The words hung in the air for a moment before Meghan exploded with a fury that shocked everyone in the studio. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes blazing with anger. and her voice reached a pitch that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "I can't have it both ways," she screamed, her careful public persona completely obliterated. "I can't have it both ways. Do you have any idea what you're saying to me right now? You're telling me that because I chose to save my own life and my family's well-being, I somehow forfeited my right to defend myself against lies and racism. That's exactly the kind of thinking that drove me out of that country in the first place." The studio cameras captured every moment of her meltdown, and the operators behind them continued filming despite the obvious discomfort of everyone involved. This was television history in the making, and they knew it, even if it was for all the wrong reasons. Colbert, now clearly regretting his decision to push the interview in this direction, tried desperately to de-escalate the situation. "Meghan, please. I think we should take a breath here. This isn't what I intended." But she cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and hostile. "Don't you dare try to manage me right now, Stephen. Don't you dare sit there and pretend you didn't know exactly what you were doing when you invited me here. You wanted a show. You wanted drama. Well, congratulations. You're getting it." The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people looking toward the exits and others whispering anxiously to their companions. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the situation play out, knowing that either decision could have serious consequences. But Meghan wasn't finished. The anger that had been building throughout the interview had reached a crescendo, and she was determined to say everything she had been holding back. "You know what the real problem is here?" she continued, her voice no longer shouting but still carrying that edge of fury. "The real problem is that people like you can't handle the truth. You can't handle the fact that your precious institutions, your beloved traditions, are built on a foundation of racism and exclusion. So when someone like me comes along and tells you what it's really like, you attack the messenger instead of dealing with the message." Colbert made one final attempt to restore some semblance of order to the interview, but his words would prove to be the catalyst for the dramatic conclusion that no one saw coming. "Meghan, I think we need to—" he began, but she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor in a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent studio. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that it caught everyone off guard. Meghan stood there for a moment, towering over Colbert's desk, her chest heaving with anger, and her eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to fill the entire studio. The audience collectively gasped, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in late-night television history. What happened next would be replayed on social media and news programs for days to come, as Meghan Markle prepared to make an exit that would overshadow everything else that had happened during the interview. Standing behind Colbert's desk, Meghan looked down at him with a mixture of contempt and wounded fury that made the entire studio feel like it was holding its breath. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, before she unleashed a final verbal assault that would become the defining moment of the entire confrontation. "You know what, Stephen? I'm done," she said, her voice now eerily calm in a way that was somehow more unsettling than her earlier shouting. "I'm done pretending that this is a normal interview. I'm done pretending that you're asking these questions out of genuine curiosity rather than a desire to humiliate me on national television. And I'm absolutely done pretending that I have to sit here and take this kind of treatment from another middle-aged white man who thinks he knows better than I do about my own lived experience." The words hit Collar like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, he looked genuinely angry, rather than just professionally persistent. "Meghan, that's completely unfair. I've been respectful throughout. This entire—" "Respectful?" she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call this respectful? You've spent the last 20 minutes questioning my integrity, demanding proof of my trauma, and basically calling me a liar on national television. If this is your idea of respect, then I can see why you and the British press get along so well." The audience was completely silent. Several people looked genuinely frightened by the intensity of the confrontation. This had gone far beyond awkward television into something dangerous and unpredictable. Collar tried once more to regain control, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "I have never called you a liar. I have asked legitimate questions about serious allegations. There is a difference. And if you can't see that, then maybe—" "Maybe what?" Meghan cut him off, her voice rising again. "Maybe I'm too emotional? Too sensitive? Maybe I'm just another angry black woman who can't handle the truth? Is that what you're going to say, Stephen? Because I've heard it all before." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Colbert's face went pale, and he looked genuinely stricken. "That's not what I was going to say, and you know it. That's not fair, and it's not accurate." But Meghan was beyond caring about fairness. She leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, but powerful enough to carry through the studio. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when they made me the villain for asking for the same security everyone else gets automatically? Was it fair when they blamed me for family drama that started long before I ever entered the picture? Was it fair when they made me out to be some kind of social climbing gold digger when I had my own career and my own money?" Her voice began to rise again, the raw emotion so intense that several audience members looked on the verge of tears. You sit there in your comfortable chair, in your comfortable studio, with your comfortable life, and you have the audacity to question whether my pain is real enough, whether my trauma is specific enough, whether my experience is valid enough for your satisfaction. Well, here's a newsflash, Stephen. I don't need your validation, and I don't need your approval. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Colbert sat frozen, unsure how to respond. The producers were frantically gesturing from the control room, but no one knew what to do. Meghan straightened, smoothing down her blazer with shaking hands, and delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire interview. "I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a conversation with someone who understood the importance of truth and justice. Instead, I found myself face to face with just another man who thinks he has the right to judge a woman's pain and find it wanting." She paused, looking around at the sea of shocked faces before continuing, her voice deadly calm. "I've spent years being told that I need to be grateful for the platform I've been given, that I should be quiet, smile, and let other people control the narrative about my life. Well, I'm done being grateful for scraps. I'm done being quiet about injustice. And I'm definitely done sitting here and letting you treat me like a defendant in some kind of trial." Colbert finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Meghan, please. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. I never intended—" "Your intentions don't matter," she snapped, cutting him off. "What matters is impact. And the impact of this interview is that you've shown your true colors. You've shown that when push comes to shove, you're just another person who thinks they have the right to interrogate me about my trauma while sitting in judgment of whether it's real enough or documented enough for your standards." The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Several audience members were openly staring at the exits, and at least one had left entirely. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was clearly going to be a historic television moment, for all the wrong reasons. Meghan took a deep breath, seeming to gather herself for one final statement. When she spoke again, her voice was clear and strong, filled with a sadness that was almost more devastating than her earlier anger. I came to America thinking I would find a place where I could be judged by my character rather than my race, where I could speak my truth without being torn apart for it. Clearly, I was wrong. Clearly, the same forces that drove me out of Britain are alive and well right here in this studio. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. To anyone watching this who has ever been told that their pain isn't real enough, that their trauma isn't specific enough, that their experience isn't valid enough, I see you, and I believe you. Don't let anyone make you doubt what you know to be true about your own life. Then she turned back to Colbert, who sat in stunned silence behind his desk. As for you, Stephen, I hope you're proud of yourself. I hope this was worth it. I hope the ratings and the headlines and the viral clips are worth contributing to a culture that tears down women who dare to speak their truth. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the stage exit, her heels clicking sharply against the floor in a rhythm that echoed through the silent studio. The audience watched in stunned fascination as she made her way toward the wings, her back straight and her head held high, despite the emotion she was fighting to contain. Just before she reached the exit, she turned back one final time and delivered the line that would be replayed endlessly across social media and news programs for weeks to come. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much, too emotional, too demanding, too difficult. Well, maybe I am too much. Maybe I'm too much for institutions that want me to be grateful for scraps. Maybe I'm too much for people who want me to smile while they tear me apart. And maybe I'm definitely too much for this show. With that, she disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a host who sat frozen behind his desk, unsure of what had just happened or how to respond. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Colbert's shocked expression and the uneasy rustling of an audience that had just witnessed something they would never forget. The episode would go down in television history as one of the most explosive interviews ever recorded. But in that silent studio, all anyone could think about was the raw emotion they had just witnessed, and the dramatic exit that had brought the confrontation to its unforgettable conclusion.